Hello, everyone. Welcome to a webinar from the Instructional Design program at Quinnipiac University. Tonight, we are very excited to have a former student, David Yates, who also is a professor of creativity studies or creative studies at Buffalo State, as well as many, many other roles. So we're really excited to have him join us for a conversation about how we can creatively use AI in instructional design. So I will turn things over to you, David.
Thank you, Kristen. It's exciting to be here. As I've told Kristen and Ruth since I graduated, I really want to give back to this amazing program. And if you're just coming into it, boy, are you in for a treat. And I think my fellow graduates who I see around the screen would share that appraisal. I found Quinnipiac through a search for best instructional design programs. And in one of those lists on the internet, it was listed at #1 and looked into 5 places. And boy, am I glad that I chose Quinnipiac, because it really is a rich and rewarding and life-changing, risking, using phrases like that, uh, opportunity to learn so much more about myself as an educator, but also about the best practices for designing lessons, courses, and all kinds of instructional activities. If it's okay, Kristen, I've been an educator for a long time. I used to call myself the poster child for lifelong learning. Now I'm the poster senior for lifelong learning. My Quinnipiac degree was my 5th, and I'll be starting my 6th in educational psychology, because just as I saw instructional design everywhere that I've been and worked and learned, I've seen psychology. And of course, it's everywhere you look in instructional design. You're taking into account the psychological factors for both the teaching side and the learning side. This is my 49th year as an educator in both K-12 and in higher education, and I absolutely love what I do. Every class is different, every course is different, no matter how many times I've ever done anything before, and I find that I stay young forever. Basically, so it's my version of the portrait of Dorian Gray. Well, I'd like to start. First of all, let me make sure everybody has access to the resources document that I've created for the webinar on the Google Drive. So I put that in the chat. Please let me know if you came in. I put it in there twice, but if you came in after the second time I put it in there, I'll have to do that one more time. And then, Kristen, you can certainly share it. I know you send out the recording, the link to the recording, and so feel free, please, to share. As I've already told the people who are here, this is a work in progress. In the course of my career, there have been certain movements or technologies or paradigm shifts, whatever you want to call them, that have really been game changers in our profession. And boy, is generative AI one of those paradigm shifters. For my money, it's right up there with the move to personal computing, the move to the internet, to mobile devices and Wi-Fi. And I think we're only scratching the surface. Now, as we've all seen, it's not all smooth sailing, because I subscribe to several blogs. In fact, I share several of them in that resource document about the role of AI in education. And as I'm sure everybody in here knows, it is a role that also includes controversies, right? Immediately after Chat GPT launched its public version last November, there was a firestorm in Chronicle of Higher Ed and other publications and blogs about what it was going to mean, especially when it came to sad topics like academic cheating. What were teachers going to have to do to prevent AI bots, from doing that? Well, all I would tell all of those people is good luck. And what I will also say is I did not become an educator and have remained an educator to be a policeman. So my attitude about this technology, I don't know if it's representative of the majority of those of us who work in education, but it's all pro. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at guidelines for using AI, but it means that we should be looking at all the ways that we can possibly use it, because that cat is not going back in the bag, or the genie's not going back in the bottle, or whatever metaphor. The train's not going back in the station, whatever metaphor you want to use. AI's been around for a long time. It really has, in various forms, but now it's like generative AI, like Chat GPT, is like the AI we're used to that gave us spell check and told us when we went on the net, you must be interested in watching this movie or reading this book or buying this product, right? So we've had AI algorithms for many years now, but generative AI, it's different. And it really does have the potential for changing life as it exists, I think, on planet Earth. And boy, are organizations jumping into using it, adapting it, for their workplaces. And I've already taken 2 different courses offered by universities, and there are going to be many more. I was in a webinar earlier today, and one of the speakers was from the technology department at the University of Florida, and he listed all of the courses that they're now offering in AI, and how every single discipline is looking at requiring 1 or more AI courses, for all of their graduates. Well, what I'd like to do is start with an attention getter rather than looking at the agenda. And what I'm going to do is play a video that is connected to my Zoom background, but then connected to our main topic for tonight, which is how to use AI creatively in instructional design. That is going to be our main focus. So let me open that video, and here we go. You always have to remember to click share the sound, right? When you play a video that has sound. Okay, here we go.
Do not arouse the wrath of the great and powerful Oz. I said come back tomorrow.
If you were really great and powerful, you'd keep your promises.
Do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creatures! Think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now. Oh. The great Oz has spoken. Oh. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great Oz has spoken.
Who are you?
Oh, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
All right. Before we zip through the workshop objectives, let's jump right in and see about a creative use of AI using a prompt. And so if you have, make sure in that resource document that I shared with you that you have the outline open on the left. That'll be the easiest way to navigate this document. So if you don't see it, if you just click on those dots in the upper left-hand corner, that opens the Google Doc outline. And then I've divided the document into sections, and you can see all those sections in the outline there. So what we want to do is jump down to using prompt patterns effectively. And then what I'd like for you to do is, hopefully on your computer, go to your favorite AI app, if you can do that. I use I use several AI apps, and I'll share with you why I use those. But primarily, I use ChatGPT, and I use Google Bard, and I use Claude, and I do use some others for other specific reasons. But I'll talk, and I'll actually show you why I use those three, because they each have different strengths. So go to whichever AI tool that you use most frequently, okay? And what I'm going to scroll down to in this section, we're going to talk about why it's so important to follow or use what are called prompt patterns when you're using generative AI. It's just a style of writing, and there are all kinds of patterns that prompt writers use, and they will produce different results. So what we're going to scroll down to is what's called the bot persona pattern, right? So in the bot persona pattern, you tell the AI, act as X and perform task Y. So you can copy this prompt. This is the prompt that I put into ChatGPT and Google Bard and Claude AI. Okay, so you can just go right here, copy the prompt just the way it's worded, and I'll talk about why it's worded that way, and then paste that into the place in whichever AI bot you're using where you would type or paste a prompt. Okay, so let's let everybody do that. And then, of course, hit enter or generate, whatever, depending on what your tool is doing. For most of them, it's just you type in or paste in the prompt, and then you hit enter. And the AI should then generate information for you. Okay, and then look at what it generated. Now, I'm going to expand my window so I can see everybody. And if you don't mind, either you could say out loud or you could go into chat and indicate which AI bot you use most frequently. Is it one of those three? Just put that in there. And if it's another one, put that in there. Like I said, I use a lot of different ones, but those are the three main ones that I use for everything except scholarly research. And I'll share other resources, other bots with you for that. So let me look at chat and see what we have. Okay, ChatGPT is the only one. Somebody says, okay, so this is good. This is really good. And the reason it's really good is that what I have found in using all these bots is that the most creative one is ChatGPT. Even though when they advertise the uses of the bot, they don't really stress or emphasize, or at least I've not seen it, the creative responses. And if you would go to the other two or other ones that I mentioned, like Bing, Microsoft's a bot is Bing, right? And then Google Bard, Claude. If you go to them, I don't find that I get as a creative response. Now, when I let me go over to my ChatGPT. I moved it around, and let's see. I thought I had it right over here, because what I wanted to do was go right in there and show you. And then you may or may not get exactly what I got. You probably are aware that depending on when you go, you may not get precisely the same response, but hopefully you'll get one that's very similar to it. Okay, so let me go back over to ChatGPT. There it is, and I will go to Toto. Toto exposes, and then I'll share. I'm gonna change my share over from the Google Doc to Chat GPT. Now I have version 4 because it enables you to add plugins, which for me is very important because, as you probably know, ChatGPT does not by itself have a live connection. It doesn't have a web browser, right? It was loaded prior to and into 2021 with all the information its authors wanted it to have. So, for instance, if you cannot go to ChatGPT and tell me what is the current exchange rate between the US dollar and the euro, it has no clue about that. Now, Google Bard could give that to you. Claude cannot give it to you for the same reason that ChatGPT can't, because Claude does not have a live web browser. So that is, when you look through the document, you're going to see one of the sections, I title it, which of the bots have live browser connections and which ones do not, because that's important to know depending on how recent you need the information to be from the AI. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that you can't get really good information from ChatGPT. It just means that it's limited to 2021 or prior, right? So you can see now what I designed this prompt to do was for an activity for my students. These are undergraduate college students, and I want them to analyze this story to help them develop their critical thinking skills, right? So if you look at my prompt, I told ChatGPT, I want you to generate 3 questions that will help undergraduate college students who read your story develop 3 important critical thinking skills: recognizing assumptions, discerning appearances from reality, and evaluating evidence. And then at the end of every prompt I give any bot, I put the sentence, ask me questions that would help you give me what I'm asking or what I'm looking for, because I want these bots to be armed with whatever information they need, and I don't want them to hallucinate or make stuff up. So that is something I do every single prompt. I say, ask me anything else you need. Now, doing that will be even more important if you give it a real open-ended question, like, generate a nutrition and exercise plan for me. Okay, well, if I put that ask me questions in there, these bots are going to say, how old are you? What's your weight? What are your current, it's going to ask me relevant questions to generating a nutrition or an exercise plan. So advice tip number 1 from David is always put at the end of your prompt, ask me any questions you need to help me with this. Sometimes you've given the bot what it needs. In this case, it didn't ask me any other questions. But if I had not told it the age of my students, for instance, it might have asked me, hey, are these K-12? Are they graduate? Are they undergraduate? Because that might have factored into the decision of the prompt. Okay, so you can see then what it does is it generates this wonderful story, okay? Life as a little dog, right? And you can see its style, because I told it to take on the persona of a dog the Toto from the Wizard of Oz. And you can tell these bots to take on the persona of real people, imaginary people, historical people, the persona of an object. One of the next example that I have in the Google Doc is, I want you to pretend that you're a baseball and you're being thrown to Aaron Judge. Forgive me, all of you who are not New York Yankee fans. I'll start crying if I talk any more about our season this year, but just know that if you're unfamiliar, Aaron Judge, who was the MVP last year, he's a home run hitter, right? So that second example I put in the Google Doc, I'm not using it for critical thinking. I would be using that for my students to analyze physics concepts like velocity or force or momentum. So you can tell the bot what you want it to analyze, generate the story for. What is the purpose of what you're doing? So it's not just generating basically a science fiction or a creative story, right? But it's doing it to meet your instructional purpose. In this case, in the case of the baseball, physics, but in the case of Toto, I want my students to develop their critical thinking skills, right? So then you saw that I also told the bot to generate questions for undergraduate students. And I can tell it generate 3, generate 4. I could also tell it to give me the answers to those questions. So when you use these bots for instructional design, you might want to do that. And then you would decide, of course, depending on whether you're going to make the activity self-completion, where the student answers the question and then clicks on the answer and sees what the answer is, right? So if you were using these for self-guided instruction, you would give the student the answer, or maybe even quiz questions. So you could use them all kinds of different ways. So you could say, give me the questions and the answers, and you could vary, you could vary the numbers and so forth, right? So just look at all the parameters, if you would, of how to use one of these bots using the bot persona pattern to generate a story that then you could use in your teaching for whatever instructional purposes, whatever discipline, whether it's factual, like mathematical, that you could tell it that for the principle, the physics kinds of concepts, math. So almost a really unlimited potential there. Now, the question that I would hope that you would ask is, okay, what's the role of stories? Why stories? So if you look in the Google Doc on the outline, click on using storytelling in teaching, please. And I have a whole section here that we're not going to go through now because you can read these and we'll run out of time, okay? But there's a book I cannot recommend enough to any of you. It's Jonathan Gottschall's amazing book, quite frankly. It's called The Storytelling Animal, and the subtitle is How Stories Make Us Human. So he studied storytelling back through history and all over the world, discovered there is no culture that he or researchers have been able to find anywhere at any time in history or anywhere on our planet that didn't value or use storytelling. So I also share resources. Then here's a summary, by the way, that came out of Perplexity. You can get good summaries, bullet-pointed summaries of many, many different resources out of these bots, like ChatGPT or Google Bard or Perplexity or Bing. So you would tell it, all right, give me a key, bullet point summary of this. So that's what this is, right? That's what these are. So you can see those. And then I went into Chat GPT and I said, I want you to describe why educators, trainers, and presenters should use storytelling and narratives in their teaching and training. So first identify why they should do that. But then here's the real meat of this prompt. Then give me 25 strategies for using storytelling and narratives in teaching. So these are going to be then 25 practical strategies. You can ask it for 50 or whatever. Now, when you do that, my recommendation is, just as it is with anything coming out of these bots, curate. Okay, read them over. Do not trust them, because as I'm sure you all know, there's a somewhat hilarious term used with all of these artificial intelligence bots called hallucinating, where they will make stuff up. So curate, use your wisdom and experience to say, all right, I'll add to this or I'll take this out. This has not worked for me. And the other thing you can do that I do all the time is I will copy the response of one bot and paste it into another one. Like I'll copy from Chat GPT, paste it into Google Bard, or paste it into Claude or Perplexity or any of these other bots. And then I will say, I want you to verify this list. And make additional suggestions or point out to me potential problems or errors. So there's a lot of different things you can tell the bot when you paste it then into a different one. But that's another way to reduce at least the chances beyond your curating of what's there. Let me stop sharing for a moment and just ask before I move on. We're going to go back to the objectives, and then we're going to look at the prompts in more detail. But let me stop sharing. Questions about what I did in terms of using the persona prompt to generate a story for instructional purposes, in this case, a fictional story for instructional purposes, and how I was specific in what I told the bot, what I wanted out of it, and what to generate for me. Anybody with a question?
It's very cool, David. I'm just wondering, don't you have potentially a situation where you ask the bot to generate questions, then you give the questions to your student and they're asking the bot to generate answers so that you end up with the bots talking to each other?
Absolutely. And Ruth, that's a great question, because what we're going to need to do, certainly with our students, and here's what I do with my creativity students. I have told them I want them to use these bots to generate ideas for whatever goal they're working on or whatever goal they're helping others. But what I tell them right up front is, first, you generate your own ideas, right? So I would tell my students in this case, try to answer the questions yourself. Now, is every student going to do that? No, they're not. Just as every student doesn't write their own paper, even right before these AIs, right? Before them, every student didn't do that. So what I tell them is, we want to use these AI tools really more like augmented intelligence, right? Not artificial. Because for our species, if we delegate or relegate everything we're doing to these bots, eventually we won't be able to think for ourselves. And I think there's a real danger of that. They have tremendous potential to augment what we're doing, okay? But when we're thinking, I think, and I just drill this in my students all the time, okay, throw your ideas up there. Like I said, generate your own ideas, answer these questions, and then we'll check. I'll tell you what this bot said, or you can, put those in and do them yourself. But I don't know of any way to prevent that myself from happening. Yeah. Except, to keep encouraging and telling them, yeah, let's use it to augment, right? Not replace. As you know, a lot of what's come out of these is the dystopian end of the world, end of humanity as we know it fears, and they're real. I don't discount them at all. Are bots going to one day, run the planet and kill our species off? I don't know the answer to that. I just know it's our job as educators, and certainly my job, to educate my students about the ethical, beneficial use of these tools and where the potential problems are. And there's a whole section in this guide about policies, by the way. Again, we're not going to have time to go through everything in the guide, but I wanted to share those with you. All right, I've collected policies from all over, like 50 different universities. What are their policies? What are their guidelines about using AI? How do you write statements into syllabi? What do you tell students is acceptable and what is not acceptable? And I'll be adding, like I said, this is a working document, okay? So I'll be adding as I get more resources, and they're coming out all the time. I'll be adding to those. So use these and share them. All right, let's go to the objectives now, and I'll share, because what I want to point out is what we're actually going to go through in the remaining time, and what I'm just including as a resource that we'll not have time to go through, because I absolutely know we're not going to get there. Okay, so if I go back up to the objectives, there's a section on how to distinguish. You can read that. You probably already know about the major differences, and I pointed out a major difference between generative AI tools and internet search engines, right, is one has a live browser connection, the other does not. But the overall major difference is that the internet search engine tool is one way, basically. You ask it to search for X, it gives you responses. It is not a dialogue structure. AI bots, and they're called bots for that reason, and ChatGPT, for me, the key word is chat, C-H-A-T, because it's designed for you to have a conversation, a chat with it. And it's at its best when that's what you do. You give it a prompt, it gives you responses, you talk back to it. You say, you can do better. Give me more details about bullet point 4. No, that's not what I'm looking for. Give me some specific examples. There are lots of ways to respond, and then lots of details you can give it up front based on your experiences. Okay, so I list for you in this section AI tools that have a live connection like Google Bard, and ones that don't, like ChatGPT and Claude, for instance. Now, keep in mind, it's a working document and things change. Now, ChatGPT, for instance, the free version is ChatGPT 3 or 3.5. I have the paid version, which is 4, because with the paid version of ChatGPT, I spend $20 a month for it, but for me, it's worth it. Because with 4, you can add plugins that connect to the internet live. So for instance, one plugin is called Kayak. It's a travel planning plugin. If I'm going to plan my travel, I do not want information that's 2 years old, okay? I want live information. So I go to ChatGPT, I add the plugin. Plugins are free. You can add 3 at a time. I then add the Kayak plugin. There's a whole website with plugins, and when you go to add them, it takes you right to that website. So again, you can only add the plugins with what they call ChatGPT Plus, which is ChatGPT 4. But I find it worth it because I want some of those live connections. They had a browser, they took it off. I think they were having problems with it, but it'll come back, I'm sure, because the biggest complaint they've gotten from people is, you know, when people search, they want the most recent information possible. So for that reason, some people are using Bard or Google Bing for their chats. Okay, but as I pointed out to you, I don't find their responses to be nearly creative. And what I urge you to do outside of this webinar is go into those. There's no cost. You don't even need an account. You can go to Bard, Google Bard, and you can go to Claude and just sign up or log in, you know, with an email. And you can paste that prompt that I gave you for Toto and just see what the responses are. See whether or not you agree with me that ChatGPT was much more imaginative in its responses. And I find that to be consistent there, okay? What we're really going to focus on for our remaining time is using effective prompt patterns for generating, for using these bots creatively, okay? But know that I have all these other resources in here for you that after our workshop, you can go right in. I've already pointed you to recognize the role storytelling can play, so you know the rationale behind why I use stories. And by the way, case studies are a great variation of studies of storytelling with a long history in academia for illustrating abstract concepts like critical thinking and creative thinking. There are a lot of disciplines that use case studies. I have a doctorate in leadership, and the leadership discipline uses case studies all the time to teach their students. Go in, look at this case study, and evaluate it. Is the leader using transformational leadership practices or servant leadership practices? In fact, I have an example in here that does just that for you. But case studies are a form of storytelling. And for all the reasons I mentioned, you really want to think about ways. That would be my advice to everybody designing courses. Look for ways to incorporate storytelling in some way into your courses, because they're powerful for a whole bunch of different reasons. Okay, so just continuing down the objectives, all the different ways that generative AI can be used in instructional design. There's all kinds of ways there. They're already being used in all kinds of different ways. They're raising questions, ethical questions like, should I use them to evaluate? Should I submit my student's paper and have a bot give me feedback on that paper? And or evaluate it according to a rubric and actually generate a score. They'll do that. Okay, so just as with all the other uses of AI, using it in course design and then for teaching raises all kinds of questions that we have to answer. We have to be able to say, is it ethical? Is it the right thing to do? And I think they all raise questions about transparency. So my overall advice, what I tell my students is I share in here with you, in the very least, if we're using it, and boy, do I use it, we have to be transparent with our students up front. This is how I'm using it in my teaching and in this course. If we expect them to be transparent, to cite it or stay away from it until we tell them that's what they should do, then for goodness sakes, we have to, I think, model that ethically. So These uses are plentiful, but they also come with strings and questions, right, about legitimate and so forth. Now, for ideas, oh my goodness. So when you go into that, the ways that it can be used, for instance, potential ID uses, okay, I have a link in there to a Google Drive folder that I have created. And of course, you have access to it now because you can see the link in there with AI generated strategies for all kinds of different topics. So if I open that link, these are all Google Docs or Word docs on the Google Drive by topic with AI generated strategies for every topic that we got into when I went through Quinnipiac's program, right? And you're going to recognize, I'm sure, Kristen and Ruth and my fellow graduates, you're going to recognize a lot of these topics in there, right? Assessments and authentic and so forth, active learning, active listening. So I went into these various bots. I gave them a prompt. I went into more than one of them, compared responses, combined them together. And then I generated a documents, cognitive load management strategies. We stress that, and I went off the deep end, quite honestly. I've gone off the deep end in my own teaching about reminding yourself how quickly humans reach cognitive load. Well, this document talks about why it's important, what influences cognitive load, and then strategies for managing cognitive load with your students. And you could go in here and add other resources, books, guides, whatever, right? So you get the idea. So these are all in there for you, and you may use them however you would like. I don't care if you copy any of these to your own Google Drive and save them. Please use anything that I am sharing with you, because either I generated them with AI bots, or I'm just sharing the links with you, so that just as our instructors did. We did that, right? Okay, so back to the objectives. Just again to highlight, if you go to locate AI tools for multimedia, we do not have time. That is a whole nother branch of AI that some of you may have gotten into, right? Because the bots I've been talking about, a Bard and Google Bard, Claude, Bing, they are for generating text responses, basically, okay? But all kinds of bots have popped up for generating multimedia. So I divided that into 3 sections, images, and then videos, and avatars, which have become quite popular, of course, in gaming. Now, what I've done here is I use a website called Analytics Vidya. That's the website name, because they have, for my money, really good reviews. They compare all of these apps and they break them down into pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses. And I like websites that do that. Okay, so anyway, you can Google, top 10 AI image generating apps, and you can get other sources for them. But I happen to like these 3. Now, I myself, I've tried almost all these. I've ended up using one that's actually not listed here. It's called Leonardo.ai, named after, I probably don't need to tell you, right? Somebody considered to be one of the most creative people in human history, Leonardo da Vinci. So anyway, Leonardo.ai, I get the quickest, cheapest, easier results for, at least what I'm looking for, when I go there and you give it a prompt and it generates an image. So I would recommend that you try it, but certainly you could try any of the rest of these as well, okay? Now, let me also tell you that I break these down by category, but what is rapidly happening in the multimedia field is existing apps are adding AI tools within their apps. So I've been using Camtasia. Ruth, I think, don't you also use Camtasia?
Yeah, quite a
Yeah,
bit.
okay. Yeah, I've used Camtasia for a long time. Well, Camtasia has added an AI tool to their app called Audiate.
Whoa.
And Audiate, yeah, it works with text and it'll alter, it generates the text that comes out of a video. So let's say you record a video, you make a video, and then it turns the video into, it generates a transcript. And then you can go into the Audiate AI tool and edit the video based on the transcript, not based on the video or based on the audio waveform like most of us have used for years, but actually go into the transcript, change things around. So anyway, a lot of tools now are doing that. They're adding AI components to their existing tools. I mean, it's like right and left. And I'll tell you, this is one of those areas that my head is spinning, quite honestly, because I am trying like a dog paddling in water to stay above it. But every day there are new revelations, new tools, new apps, new controversies. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. All right, so all the rest of these things are in here for you, okay? This one I want to point, okay, scholarly research. I'll tell you what I use, but you'll have to do your own looking there, because one of the problems that ChatGPT or even Google Bard or some of these other ones have with scholarly research is trying to get citations or DOIs for them. So I recommend, if you're not already using them, that you check out cite.ai, elicit.org, because either one of those, they are really good websites for searching for scholarly research. Elicit, for instance, you can put in a topic and it'll generate a spreadsheet with the citations and the DOIs and the abstract, and you can narrow your research. It will give you links if the PDF is available on the open internet, like they are with at least some scholarly research. If not, it will give you a link that says, okay, log in here to your institution's own firewall. So I will log into either Quinnipiac's access in the library or to Buff State or the other places I teach for. So I can take the citation information and save time when I get there, right? So they're really, really valuable for that use. So if you've not tried them out, try those. Try both of those out, okay? Again, here are all kinds of policies, and then additional AI resources, blogs and newsletters that I subscribe to, just so I try to stay up. But let's finish now by doing a little more practicing. So I'm going back to the prompt patterns, okay? The prompt patterns, and I've shared with you, and you've got some other examples that you can try where you can paste these into your favorite AI bot, see what it gives you. Again, I recommend you try it with multiple ones, right? I use ChatGPT, and then you can see what it gives you, and you can hopefully see how to use them instructionally. Now, remember, the persona pattern can be real or fictional people of any age or era. And I think that's kind of amazing. So, like, for example, 3, I did this with my creativity students. Act as Thomas Edison and explain why you believe that perseverance was one of the most important creative thinking skills. Okay? Ask me questions that will help you. generate that. So you can pick somebody from history. And what a cool way, if you think about it, right? What a cool and interesting and engaging way to have students research information by having a historical figure basically do like a role play or a narrative. Now, again, you want to curate. So what I'll do is I'll take that information into something like Perplexity, which will give me sources of information and citations about Thomas Edison. So again, the advantage of going from one to the other there, right? You can also do some really cool role playing. Again, another form of narration. Okay. There was a wonderful show back in the 70s that Steve Allen hosted called Meeting of Minds. Did anybody ever see that? Unbelievable. Yeah. Okay, Paul, thank you very much. You just outed yourself in terms of age, but okay. Now, by the way, yes, pointing to his gray beard. Okay. By the way, most of those shows are on YouTube, so you can actually watch the show. But he would have famous people in history sit around and they would have a discussion about whatever topic it was. Okay, so actors played the roles and it was really quite engaging. So I told ChatGPT, okay, I want you to play famous people sitting around a table, and they are create a 5-person scenario, right, where famous people representing different political models. So think about all the different topics. You could have a debate going on, right? Pick some people you know represent those points of view, and then have them debate on the show, and then provide a host. And then you can see I said include actual dialogue, and then identify 10 questions students watching this activity. So again, give the bot the parameters. What do you want instructionally to get out of this? Okay, what do you want your students to get out of it? And then watch the responses. Keep talking to the bot. If for instance, the first time I did it, there was no dialogue, and I said, you can do better. I want an actual dialogue because I want my students to look at the words these people are using, you see, and evaluate their conversations. Okay. All right. Next pattern, audience persona. So now you're targeting specifically. Now, we told these chats before who the audience was: graduate students, 8th grade math students, whoever the target audience is. But now that's where the emphasis shifts, okay? So I'm telling it here, create a case study for doctoral leadership students they can use to identify major characteristics. So you can go in and play with these. This interaction should include written and oral communication. Follow the case study with questions. The doctoral leadership student should have to answer as they analyze the case study. And remember, always ask anything. All right. Explain climate change in a way that will make it easy for 4th graders. It's a wonderful way to differentiate instruction, because you can take the same lesson and ask the chat to generate activities or explanations for a grade above or a grade below, right? Or for a group that maybe is visually impaired, or a group that has another disability. So there are lots of ways to differentiate instruction using these by targeting your prompt for a specific audience, right? And you can even give it a lot more detail. Look at this one. Explain large language models to Leonardo da Vinci. Now, if you put this one, I encourage you, put this one in chat and Google Bard and Claude, or the other ones, and just watch the variations of them. Watch how much more, I think, creative ChatGPT was, the way it talks back to Leonardo, the way it addresses Leonardo, right? And I went in one of them and said, add, you're a CNN reporter who's gone back in time, right? And so again, you can dialogue with the bot, and get them to, to change the parameters of what's going on. Now, the rest of these, you can see what they are. There are many, many other patterns. Okay, many other patterns, but these are the most common ones that I have used. And you can see the question refinement. When I ask a question, suggest to me a better way to ask this question so that you give me a better response. You see me use this all the time. Always ask me. Flipped interaction. You can say, ask me a series of questions until you have enough information to give me what I want. Or give it data. You can give it data that maybe it doesn't have, like number of birds in your neighborhood or other things it would have no clue about, right? And so you can give it data and then say, give me this response to it. And this one's really cool also for us instructional designers. You can tell it to give you the output in different ways. You can say, I wanted this in a comma-separated list. So you can copy the comma-separated list and turn it into a spreadsheet. You can say, I want a 3-tiered outline when you give me this. Because now when you go through the outline, you can say, I need more information on point 3C or whatever it is. Or give me a table and give it the headings for the table and the columns or the rows, or give me a numbered or a bulleted list. So telling these bots the format you want the information can be very useful. Okay, I'm sorry, I've gone 1 minute overtime here, but I wanted to kind of zip through and give you highlights, but also know that you've got the document. You can play with some of these examples. Okay, let me stop sharing and stop talking. Thank you.
I think it's impressive you went just 1 minute over, because there's so much to cover here, and you have, you've been playing around with this, I think, a lot more than, well, I'll speak for myself, than I have. So it's great to kind of see what you've uncovered so far and to have a lot of these tips. So I really appreciate your presentation, but I also really appreciate this document that we can kind of dig into, and all of the model prompts I think are really helpful. So thank you. I think that's one of the things that some people don't seem to know when I talk to them, is like, how do I even start? Like, what do I even ask this thing? And it's hard to understand what it's capable of if you don't even know where to start. So it's really good to have that document.
Yeah, and if you go to the resources section, Kristen, the additional resources, I recommend there are actually 2 courses. Vanderbilt University has a Coursera course that's free. I paid because I wanted the certificate, and it's wonderful. And he really goes through in great detail, even more than I have, how to engineer the prompts. He has this really cool example of he wants to convince his son to eat better. So he has ChatGPT engage with his son in a game that ties Pokemon to nutrition. It's hilarious. Yeah, and you can do that. You can set these bots up to engage with your students, to ask your students questions. They respond, the bot. And so it's a wonderful course, by the way. And like I said, it's free. Okay?
That's one at Vanderbilt, you said, David?
It is from Vanderbilt University. Yep. And they've just come out with another one. I haven't started it yet, but I will, because the first one was so good. Coursera now has another Vanderbilt course, like I think it's called Advanced Data Analysis. because that's another one of those uses. I didn't tie it specifically to course design, but a lot of people are using these bots. They're feeding it tons of data and say, give me trends and patterns and crunch these numbers and stuff.
One potential problem with this is it's kind of a problem that's come up in the past. Things like what tends to get out there is what's already out there. In other words, if you have, for example, historical works by featuring females or women in history, where they're not featured in books, so they don't show up in books, so then they don't get cited because they weren't in the books to cite them. So this is the same problem. Like if stuff isn't on the internet, it won't get fed into the knowledge base of the AI, and then it won't get spit back out. So if you ask for 5 historical figures, it's going to give you 5 historical figures who are already talked about, not 5 historical figures who people don't know so much about.
Yeah. And Ruth, it's another reason when like I said, I never trust ChatGPT alone, right? I take what it gives me. I ask it, give me the 20 most influential creativity scholars of the last 50 years. Okay. It left people out of the list that I know from the training I've taken at Buff State. People like Alex Osborne, who invented the term brainstorming. Okay. So I took that list into these other live internet connections and said, hey, who's missing? Why are they missing? And so forth. So you're right. And of course, one of the controversies about these bots is their built-in bias, right?
Yeah.
They are unconsciously biased toward whatever data they were fed. I read with horror about an Asian student who wanted to know how she could fix her resume to be more appealing, right, to prospective readers, okay? And she had a picture on the resume, and the bot encouraged her to make her picture look more Caucasian and change her eyes to blue.
Yeah.
Because the data it had. So yeah, that's another one of those concerns that we need to bring, certainly to the attention of our students. That and I think it's going to change with time. Plus, right, that the bots, ChatGPT was trained through 2021. They're already working on the next version of it, where they're going to address these issues that we keep bringing up, and they're going to add more resources. There will still be things missing, but I think the technology is going to get better. Yeah.
I have a question. Do any of these bots learn based on the questions that we're giving them? Do they take the information in that we're giving them, or whatever we're typing in, and then turn around and generate, so I could tell it a story that's completely false. Does it take that as, oh, you know what, that'd be true, let me use it here somewhere else?
I can't address how they're using it, but Marnie, yes, everything, and this is something we have to tell our students, don't put private personal information in there, right? I can say I've got graduate students. I would never give ChatGPT a list of those students' names and their email addresses or their ages or anything like that, right? I would give them a range because yes, they learn by the input, right? How did Google learn what books we like to read or what we like to buy? We are the product, right? Using Google is free, but we're the product because it uses all that data. So Marnie, they absolutely use whatever we put into it. Now, they're hoping that's how they make them better. That's how they'll address some of these bias and, because if more diverse people put other resources in there, they're going to balance out, hopefully, the older, but absolutely everything you put in. Now, they're working on ways, and companies are real nervous about that. The major grocery store in Florida is Publix, supermarkets. Publix will not allow its staff to use these bots because they don't want proprietary information getting into them. But what's happening is they're making versions of them for companies that don't
Mine
incorporate.
has one.
Yours has one. Okay, yeah.
My company, we have our own chat. We have our own GPT. I've only used it a few times though, so I can't really compare. And now I want to go out and use it and ask better questions, because that was the biggest thing I learned tonight was how do you ask the questions? Because I never thought, and I put this in the chat, I never thought that I could actually ask it to ask me questions to verify and clarify and get better results.
Right.
So I will admit I was multitasking and playing at the same time. And wow, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
That takes it to a whole new level. You know, instead of just asking a simple question, getting a simple answer, I'm getting like really good stuff.
Yeah. Remember, it's chat. So the difference between search engines and these bots is
I didn't realize you could just chat with it.
They do. And so the more questions you ask and the more times you tell it, ask me what information do you need? Whether you ask me questions or what information you need, so critical to getting the responses that you need. And also telling it, no, that's not what I want, right? I slapped Chat GPT on that and I said, how could you leave out, right? The man who invented brainstorming. And then you can also ask it why. There's a great critical thinking step there. Why did you leave it out? Well, it told me because he did not do the kinds of research about creativity that all these other people I told you did. So he didn't show up in the list of most research creativity scholars. Osborne was an advertising executive, not really known as a creativity scholar, like Teresa Amabile and the rest of the people. So anyway, that's cool. Asking it why. Why did you leave them out? And they're human. They're designed to respond in a human way. So it's kind of funny. They'll apologize to you. I'm so sorry, David. You're absolutely right. He should have been in the list. And here's why. And I'm laughing because this is a machine telling me it's or he's sorry, right? It reminds me of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Do any of you remember that movie? There was a sentient bot, and that movie came out in 1968. I wrote my high school thesis on that, by the way. All right, and Hal, who is the bot, tells the astronaut Dave,
I can't do that, Dave.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm afraid I can't do that. Yeah. And for years, if you clicked on something on an Apple computer and you made a mistake, it would play, Dave, I'm sorry. I'm afraid I can't do that. Yeah. So anyway,
here's a good point about that. So go one letter higher than HAL.
There you go.
What do you get?
You get where HAL came from.
Yeah.
Yeah. So go one letter for each of those.
M.
That's right. IBM.
There's a secret critique of IBM.
Oh, that's really funny.
It's where they came up with the name for a HAL.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
Yeah. Well, Hal, and
cannot
this
do that.
is where some of the fears of AI killing off, Hal kills everybody else on the ship. And Dave is the only one left. And Hal goes crazy because Hal develops a complex, right? He knows a secret. So anyway, that is where there are some dystopian movies. That's what happens. AI goes amok and machines start launching missiles and running whatever. So
yeah, all the first law of robotics, Asimov.
There you go.
Yeah.
So some of those concerns are legit. And like I said, the main one I like to tell my students is augment, don't supplement. Don't replace. Don't use these apps instead of, because the long-term implications for our species, they're not good.
Is there any move to have personalized chatbots? Like, for example, suppose when I grade papers, there are 47 comments that I use quite a lot. I find myself using over and over again. Could I create my own like bank of my
Yeah, there's an
Ruth bot?
example of this. Like this week, Google in Bard is adding Bard Labs, which are going to be deeper integrations into like you could talk to your Gmail account. So like ask it a question of your data that you have in Gmail,
Yeah.
and then it's able to do that. But nothing quite like that yet, Ruth. Yeah, it's tricky that way. But there are other people who are also. I was just listening to a podcast today. There are people using ChatGPT and then plugging in other AI toolkits to it, so you could like store your own data and then serve that up with ChatGPT. If you're trying to build a language, kind of human language mimicking kind of thing around it, maybe you could have a list of like these are my most common things, and then there's a workflow that does it.
Yeah, we're all the variations, and Google's, they want to be out ahead, right? And so you're going to see them do the kind of things you're talking about, Ruth. I think not too distant future with something like Google Classroom, which is right there. Learning management system is Google Classroom. And so I think that's a foregone conclusion. But the personalization that Marnie and I were talking about, where it's already happening with companies to personalize the use.
Right.
It's absolutely going to happen with us because people are not going to want their personal information. And we're not going to want our students put their personal information up there, but we're going to want to use it for things like what you're describing, I think.
Amazing. Well, David, don't neglect to read the chat because there's a lot of nice
Some good
comments.
stuff.
Oh,
Yeah, I can send it to you after with the recording if you want to.
thank you.
I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
wrap up just because to be conscious of time. I had a long day. I know everybody here probably had a long day. But I really appreciate, David, all the work that you put into this and everything that you shared with us. And it was really wonderful. And I hope that this is the beginning of these conversations in the IDN program. I'm going to try to see if we can line up some more webinars around this topic. I think something that is particularly interesting, kind of what Ruth was talking about, is workflow. And I know Jess Bear was on earlier, but she jumped on and off. I know she's been doing some instructional design work and developing sort of workflows of using some of these different tools, how you're talking, together and jumping off of one another to build out things. So I'm going to see if we can get some more conversations going around this. But I really appreciate you being the first one and for offering to do this for our group. It was a great conversation.
It's
Really great.
fantastic. Thank you, David.
And thank you everyone for
Thank you.
being here. I'm going to
Thank you.
stop the recording.
Thanks, David.
Maybe.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Marnie. Appreciate that.